Hello, I'm Bill Leipold, and welcome to this edition of Breakfast at the Barracks. Joining me is Paula Caligiuri, Professor of Human Resource Management in the School of Management and Labor Relations at Rutgers, New Brunswick. Paula, welcome.
Thanks, Bill. It's nice to be here.
We're excited to have you.
I'm excited to be here.
One of the things that you're really well known for is the conversation around career.
Correct.
And on your website, you started a great conversation in your blog recently about the fact that colleges, careers, and parents need to take a different kind of stance than we used to before.
Right.
So can you kind of explain the process? What was the used to before and what's the now?
Sure. Well, if you think about it, it's great that we're doing this here at a university campus talking about this issue. When you think about when we went through school, and the experience was almost identical from what we experienced and what the students are experiencing now, right? They apply, they get in, they go through orientation, classes, professors, majors, graduation, then what? Right? That's all identical.
We all get to the then what and where am I going, what am I doing?
Right.
Especially if you're a humanities person in some ways.
For example. But what's different now, it used to be the case that employers would hire us on potential, right? Your major, your grades, maybe your letters of recommendation. Now what we're seeing is that employers are looking for absolutely potential, but they're also looking for tangible skills. And that's different. That's really different than what it once was. So now we need to encourage the kids who are going through college right now, we need to encourage them to actually acquire those skills, which, again, that's a little bit different than it was before.
Well, let's talk about those acquirement of skills.
Sure.
I'm a product of higher education.
Right.
I love higher education. Obviously, I work here. Higher education is a lot about critical thinking, a lot about writing, a lot about the ability to dialogue and see perspectives. But what other skill sets are employers looking for, and how do students acquire those skill sets during their college career?
Right. It depends on the nature of the position that a student would want. But if you think about the various things that are open to students in a great university like Rutgers, such as, for example, if somebody is interested in doing something with data, they could go work for a professor who's working on a research project. It's a great way to get data management skills. If a student is interested in working in business, perhaps it's getting an additional language in one of those critical languages, Arabic, Mandarin, Spanish. All of those would be terrific right now. Again, adding tangible skills. The other thing that's undervalued, and the students aren't really connecting with yet, is the issue of a network. It's tremendous opportunity now for students to think about, a guest comes into a class, a guest lecturer, a guest speaker comes into class, to actually make a contact with that person, maybe hand in a resume, exchange a business card, something to enable them to start building their network.
Let's talk about that for a second. This millennial generation is somewhat a little interesting when it comes to the whole network perspective. They seem much more capable at the social networking context, but the human-to-human network, in terms of being a little shy in class, building those networks, seems to be somewhat of a challenge. How would you encourage a parent or a student to kind of look at both of those networks and kind of build both of those networks?
It's explaining the criticality of it. There are two ways, and regardless if they're young graduates or people mid-career, there's two ways people get jobs now. It's the skills they possess and the network, the professional network that they have. That's it. So it's encouraging students to realize the value of that network, and in fact encouraging them and giving them the tools to make those connections, those professional connections, teaching them how to follow up professionally. Those are all so very critical now.
I think the interesting thing is our students don't always know the difference between a career and a job. They seem to be very focused on the job, and they seem to be very focused on the pay. And so can you explain a little difference in terms of your philosophy, in terms of that whole conversation, because I know you've written a whole book about it, and we'll get to that in a second.
Sure. No, I am not comfortable with the word job, if for no other reason than that traditional 40-hour week, 9-to-5 job. A lot of those what was once considered stable jobs, those are going away. And what we're seeing is that people who have greater stability and greater fulfillment are taking more ownership of their entire career. So where it used to be, we would enter an organization and essentially start a job, and then we almost relinquished control to the organization to help us manage our career. That's going away. And in replacement, what we're seeing is that people are taking greater ownership of their careers. And I think that's exactly where this is all going in the future.
Well, your new book, let's talk a little bit about that, because I think your new book covers a great deal of what you just talked about. Gives some pointers and really gives a philosophy in terms of how to approach this.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, I'd love to. So as I mentioned, I advocate that people should have multiple streams of income. I believe that the reliance on any given organization solely is probably the riskiest position we could be in now. We're seeing that again and again with unemployment being high, offshoring, greater use of contingent workers. We absolutely need to rely more on ourselves. The other big punchline of the book is that we should be thinking more about our talents and leveraging our talents and thinking about ways that we can use our talents to in fact be more effective in our income streams. So if you think about biggest concern people have with this is time. Who has time to work more than one job, right? The issue with time that a lot of people don't realize is that if you love what you do, and I interviewed a lot of people for my book, the people who love what they do have a hard time telling me how many hours per week they work.
Okay.
If you talk to someone who dislikes what they do, they can tell you down to the minute how many hours per week they're working.
Well, here's the interesting question for me. We're all taught, especially my generation, an Xer, that you go after the job, you go after the career for some of the money. How do we change some of this dominant culture perspective with 3 generations, sometimes 4 generations now in play, with regards to thinking about this? Because I agree with you. You can tell when folks are passionate about their job. Their eyes light up, their smile comes across their face. They're not saying that work isn't difficult, but they're excited by what they're doing. So how do we kind of change part of that kind of conversation about this isn't that? You know, and go after the talent part as you talk about, because it's so different than kind of what our parents went through, our grandparents went through, and even me went through in terms of being able to have that conversation with a student. It seems such a huge paradigm change.
It is, and there's a couple points of entry that, you know, when you think about someone who's enthusiastic, a young graduate, someone who really wants to have more meaning in their career, they usually butt up against either parents, professors, whomever, who are suggesting that, listen, go to work for a big name company, pay your dues, do your time, and your career will progress. That actually, we need to encourage a student, in fact, to take greater ownership and realize that that company probably isn't going to be managing his or her career. They absolutely do need to be more active in managing their own career.
We're in a hard economic time. And the class of 2009 and the class of 2010, 2009 had some challenges, class of 2010 is going to have a lot of challenges. We're working on talent. We want to be able to get them excited, but they also need to sustain themselves while they kind of do that. So how do you kind of advise a student or advise somebody who has just been laid off to kind of do that? Yes, you need to earn some money to survive, but you also need to really develop those talents to kind of do what you love. How do we advise somebody in that kind of position?
And it actually goes back to your previous question. It's that mindset shift. There was once, and I think it's embedded in the question, right? The mentality that in order to have greater stability, you need to go work for someone else. And I would argue that perhaps one of your career acts, it's a phrase I use in the book, perhaps one of your career acts might be working for someone else, but realize that you can develop alternate and other career acts to also bring in additional forms of income. As soon as you're no longer fully beholden to one organization, you do have greater financial security, greater financial flexibility. The other piece of this, when you have multiple streams of income and you're doing the things you really love and you're leveraging your talents, what the research is finding, it's really quite interesting. We're finding that not only are people more fulfilled, but they also build the 2 things that we started the interview with. They build their skills and they build their network. So what we see is that people who have those multiple streams of income, they have a tendency and the ability to in fact enhance their career faster than those who are working in one traditional 9-to-5 position. So it's financially enhancing, it's skill enhancing, it's network enhancing, and it's a better way to work.
The millennials can listen to you. I think they get that. I think that's how they do that. I think the conversation then is, how does the millennial have their conversation with their parent? And I'm being honest, I think that's one of the things on your blog that you're like, listen, parents, life is not as you know it.